Picture this. Two respected scientists are so obsessed with beating each other that they hire armed mercenaries, blow up million-year-old fossils with dynamite, and wage a literal war across the American frontier. This isn't some wild Western movie. This actually happened, and it all started over dinosaur bones. I'm talking about a scientific rivalry so intense that it changed paleontology forever. These two men didn't just compete, they tried to destroy each other. And the craziest part? Their bitter feud might be the reason we know about T-Rex, Triceratops, and most of the dinosaurs that fascinate us today. So buckle up, because we're about to dive into the most ridiculous, explosive, and surprisingly productive scientific war in history. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel, where we uncover the weirdest stories from history that somehow actually happened. Today we're traveling back to the Wild West, but we're not talking about cowboys. We're talking about scientists who turned dinosaur hunting into an all-out war. This is the story of Othniel Charles Marsh versus Edward Drinker Cope, a rivalry so legendary it got its own name, the Bone Wars. We'll cover how these former friends became sworn enemies, the insane tactics they used, and how their vendetta accidentally led to some of the greatest dinosaur discoveries ever made. But first, let me set the scene. Here's what makes this story even crazier. Marsh and Cope actually started as friends. In the 1860s, these two brilliant paleontologists genuinely respected each other. They exchanged letters, shared discoveries, and even named fossil species after one another. Edward Drinker Cope was younger, wealthy, ambitious, and obsessed with being first to publish. Marsh was older, more methodical, politically connected, and had steady government funding. For a few years, it looked like they might become the dynamic duo of paleontology. But here's the thing about massive egos: they don't play well together. And both men had egos the size of the dinosaurs they were digging up. The first crack appeared when Cope made what should have been a minor mistake. He reconstructed a plesiosaur fossil and published his findings. There was just one problem. He'd accidentally put the head on the wrong end of the body. Now, any reasonable colleague might have quietly pointed this out in private. But Marsh? Oh no. He publicly humiliated Cope by announcing the error at a scientific meeting. Cope was so mortified that he tried to buy up every single copy of the journal to hide his mistake. But it was too late. And that's when two respectable scientists decided to become mortal enemies. But this feud might have stayed civilized if not for perfect timing. The American West in the 1870s was like a paleontologist's paradise. New railroad lines were opening access to remote areas, and massive fossil deposits were being discovered in Colorado, Wyoming, and Nebraska. We're talking about bone beds so rich you could literally trip over dinosaur fossils. This was the birth of what became known as the Great Dinosaur Rush. Think California Gold Rush, but with scientists instead of prospectors. And suddenly, Marsh and Cope found themselves competing for the same prize, being the king of American paleontology. Instead of healthy competition, they turned fossil hunting into warfare. They didn't just want to beat each other, they wanted to utterly destroy their rival's career, reputation, and financial stability. The question is, how far were they willing to go? The answer was frighteningly far. What started as professional rivalry quickly became something that would make modern corporate espionage look tame. First came the bribes. Both men started paying workers at each other's dig sites to secretly funnel information and fossils to them instead. Imagine being a bone digger in 1875 and having two wealthy scientists trying to outbid each other for your loyalty. It was like being a double agent, except instead of state secrets, you were trafficking in prehistoric lizard bones. But that was just the beginning. Soon they were sending spies to infiltrate each other's expeditions. These weren't casual observers. We're talking about people whose full-time job was to report on their rivals' discoveries and future plans. The American frontier had become a paleontological Cold War. Marsh, with his government connections, hired what can only be described as armed security guards to patrol his dig sites. Picture this. You're a fossil hunter in the Wild West, and you approach a dinosaur quarry only to be met by men with rifles telling you to back off. That actually happened. Cope, desperate not to be outdone, hired his own armed guards. So now, we had two groups of scientists, each protected by their own private militias, glaring at each other across the Badlands. But here's where it gets truly insane. When stealing and spying weren't enough, Marsh and Cope resorted to the nuclear option. If I can't have it, nobody can. They began deliberately destroying fossil sites to prevent their rival from accessing them. We're talking about using dynamite actual explosives to blow up dig sites containing million-year-old fossils that could never be replaced. Think about that. These were supposedly dedicated scientists, and they were willing to destroy irreplaceable pieces of Earth's history just to spite each other. Workers reported finding fossils that had been deliberately smashed with hammers. Quarries were sabotaged overnight. Precious specimens that had survived for millions of years were reduced to rubble because two grown men couldn't share their toys. The media ate it up. Newspapers across the country started covering the Bone Wars like it was a sporting event. The American public was fascinated by these two mad scientists locked in their bizarre grudge match. But the real battlefield wasn't just in the dirt, it was in scientific journals, where they went after each other with everything they had. The personal attacks became legendary for their viciousness. They accused each other of scientific fraud, incompetence, theft, and basically every professional sin imaginable. Scientific journals, which were supposed to be dignified publications, became the equivalent of tabloid gossip magazines. Marsh had a particular advantage because of his political connections. He secured a position with the U.S. Geological Survey, which gave him both government funding and official credibility. This was like having the backing of the federal government in a scientific feud. Meanwhile, Cope was burning through his personal fortune at an alarming rate. He was funding his own expeditions, hiring his own workers and guards, trying to keep pace with someone who had Uncle Sam's wallet behind him. Cope was literally spending himself into bankruptcy in pursuit of dinosaur bones and revenge. But here's what's truly wild. Even as they were destroying each other's careers and fossils, they were also making incredible discoveries. Which raises a fascinating question. Was all this chaos actually worth it? On one hand, the destruction was real and horrifying. Countless fossils that could have advanced our understanding were destroyed forever. Both men's reputations were permanently tarnished. Cope ended up bankrupt, and Marsh's later years were consumed more by rivalry than actual science. But here's the complex part. In their desperate race to outdo each other, Marsh and Cope collectively discovered over 130 new species of dinosaurs. We're not talking about minor discoveries. These were the heavy hitters of paleontology. Stegosaurus? That was Marsh. Triceratops? Also Marsh. Allosaurus? Marsh again. Diplodocus? You guessed it. Meanwhile, Cope was discovering Camarasaurus, Coelophysis, and dozens of other species that became foundations of our understanding of dinosaur evolution. Their frantic pace was unprecedented. In their rush to beat each other to publication, they were uncovering and naming new species at a rate that wouldn't be matched again for decades. The Bone Wars were simultaneously destroying and advancing science. The rivalry followed both men to their graves literally. As they aged, their feud became even more personal and petty. Cope, facing financial ruin, made increasingly desperate attempts to prove his superiority. In one final, almost pathetic gesture, he challenged Marsh to compare the size of their respective fossil collections. Winner takes all the bragging rights. Marsh never responded. But Cope wasn't done. When he knew he was dying, he left instructions for his brain to be studied and measured, hoping to prove once and for all that he was more intelligent. Think about that level of obsession. Even death couldn't end his need to beat Marsh. Both men died as they had lived consumed by their rivalry, their legacies forever complicated by their own pettiness. So how do we remember them today? It's complicated. They're often cited as the perfect cautionary tale of what happens when ego overtakes scientific collaboration. Their methods, theft, sabotage, destruction, are universally condemned. The phrase Bone Wars has entered scientific vocabulary as shorthand for bitter academic rivalries. But here's what makes their legacy fascinating. Despite everything, their discoveries remain cornerstones of paleontology. Many of the dinosaurs that capture our imagination today were first uncovered during their frantic race to outdo each other. Modern paleontology might look very different if not for their rivalry. Their competitive fury certainly accelerated the field by decades. And that's the incredible, ridiculous story of the Bone Wars. A scientific rivalry so intense it involved armed guards, dynamite, and enough drama to fuel a dozen movies. Marsh and Co. proved that the pursuit of knowledge isn't always noble. Sometimes it's messy, petty, and destructively human. But they also showed us that even our worst impulses can accidentally lead to amazing discoveries. Their feud gave us some of the most iconic dinosaurs in history. The Bone Wars remind us that science isn't just about calm discovery. It's about passion, obsession, and the very human drive to be first, to be best, to be remembered. Sometimes that drive creates beautiful things. Sometimes it destroys them. And sometimes it does both. So here's my question for you. If you were competing for the greatest fossil discoveries in history, how far would you go? Would you play fair and risk being second place? Or would you go full Bone Wars mode? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this wild piece of scientific history. If you enjoyed this bizarre tale, smash that like button, hit subscribe for more incredible stories, and ring the notification bell so you never miss when we uncover another story that sounds too crazy to be true. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.